Postmodernism by Laura
and Nicole.
It emerged in the 1980s, postmodernism, challenged traditional modernist theories that sought to create an all-encompassing theory to explain society. Key postmodernists are Baudrillard, 1980 to 1994, and Lyotard, 1984, and also Derrida, which is another. Sociology is a set of stories belonging to a specific period of history. Modernism, whose roots lay in the 18th century historical movement, the Enlightenment.
Postmodernists claim that in a media-saturated world, the distinction between reality and the media representation of it becomes blurred or even invisible.
Media reality is the new reality. Baudrillard claimed that the 9/11 attacks were the absolute event, and we only understand them in terms of the media images which bombard us. He argued that the events were as much as televisual as real. We cannot distinguish the representation of events on television from the actual events. Is known as hyperreality. There is no longer distinction between reality and its representing image or simulacrum.
The distinction between media and reality has collapsed, and we now live in a reality defined by images and representations, a state of simulacrum. Images refer to Images refer to each other and represent each other as reality, rather than as some pure reality that exists before the image represents it. This is the state of hyperreality.
There are many media examples of text or products which deliberately set out to explore and play with this state of hyperreality.
They break the rules of realism to explore the nature of their own status as constructed texts. They don't want to represent reality, but to represent media reality.
There are many differences from modernity to postmodernity. In the modern age, the focus was on production, whereas in the postmodern age, it was all about consumption. Where it was about community life in the modern age, it is now fragmented and everyone thinks for themselves, which is known as individualism. Social class used to define you, but now you can have an identity from other sources. There used to be one type of family, which was the nuclear family, but now there are many different options. There used to be a belief in continuity and situation, but now there is breakages with the past and traditions, so nobody follows the traditions anymore. Education is seen in the postmodern age as for no reason whatsoever, whereas it had a role in modern age. There used to be a one-way media in the modern age, but now there is so many different choices of media in the postmodern age. Where there used to be overt social control in the modern age, we now have covert with CCTV and surveillance. And science used to aid progress and find the truth, but in the postmodern age, science is only one source of knowledge and there's a number of truths now. There used to be structure, security, pace and stability, you knew who you were. But now in the postmodern age, there's confusion, lack of structure, incessant choice, and you create who you want to be. Key features of postmodernism. One is that truth is relative.
Consumerism is all.
Transformation of the self, i.e. pick and mix.
Disillusionment with the idea of progress.
Uncertainty.
Fragmentation of social life.
Incessant choice.
Globalisation.
And the impact of ICT on social life.
A key theorist is Jacques Derrida. Modernism is logocentrism. Postmodernists rejected this and argue that trying to tell the big story now is impossible. Social structure is in a state of flux. All meaning is now reflective, relative, and socially constructed. Reality is fragile and confusing.
Jean-Francois Lyotard, in 1984, destroyed the meta-narratives. All meta-narratives are simplistic and reductionist. We should focus on playing language games to explore the many narratives that exist. Knowledge is no longer a tool of the authorities. We have our own choice and freedom. Actions and ideas are now judged on how useful they are rather than how true they are. The collapse of the grand narrative. Meta-narratives, grand narratives are grand, large-scale theories and philosophies of the world, such as the progress of history, the ability of knowing everything by science, and the possibility of absolute freedom.
Another is Baudrillard. He said that we are constantly surrounded by an ecstasy of communication and that communication is sickening. We are now just customers whose desires are created by the media. We pursue the images attached to the products.
Simulacra means make-believe goods which bear no relationship to the world. We live in hyper-realities in which appearances are everything. Image is everything.
The objective value system. Consumerism and how different objects are consumed in different ways. Needs are constructed rather than innate. Objects always say something about their users. The ideological genesis of needs proceeds the production of goods to meet those needs.
More in depth about Baudrillard.
Hyperreality, a condition in which reality has been replaced by simulacra.
Simulacra is when a sign loses its relation to reality, it then begins to simulate a simulation. Simulation is the process in which a representation of something comes to replace the thing which is actually being represented. The representation then becomes more important than the real thing.
Hyperreality is the division between real and simulation has collapsed. Therefore, an illusion of an object is no longer possible because the real object is no longer there. Understanding hyperreality. Celebrity culture. Celebrities who reach a point at which every aspect of their lives is taken care of by someone else are said to live in a hyperreal world. They lose the ability to interact with people on a normal level and are cocooned by hyperreality. Normal people often try to copy this. For example, one man who is obsessed with Britney Spears and every aspect of his life relates to her. He genuinely believes that he lives in the same world as her. This is a common case in which someone has become more engaged in the hyperreal world than the actual real world.
Video games. PlayStation games, which have a lot of violence in them, often have a lot of bad press. The media believe that people will copy the actions which they see in the video game. This happens very rarely. Only a small percentage of the people who play the violent video games actually copy the actions which they see on them. For example, a man who believed he was in a game and would therefore gain points by carrying out illegal tasks. The worst crime which he committed was killing his best friend. His argument was that he had been told to do it, meaning that he genuinely thought he was taking part in the game when in fact it was real life, showing that he could no longer distinguish the difference between gameplay and real life.
Conclusion. Postmodernism demonstrates that when we try and produce object as a perceivable shape, it appears sadly lacking to us. It is present only in absence, knowable only through its unrepresentability.
For Lyotard, postmodern non-representation is the most ethical and divine blank text and should not be writing over. Baudrillard also values the postmodern principle of non-representation. Postmodernist theorists argue that we now live in a postmodern world characterised by diversity and fragmentation. Postmodernists stress that society is changing so rapidly and constantly that it is marked by uncertainty, with society split into a huge variety of groups with different interests and lifestyles. Postmodernists view the category crime as simply a social construction based on a narrow legal definition, reflecting an outdated meta-narrative of the law which does not reflect the diversity of postmodern society.
In postmodern society, people are increasingly freed from the constraints arising from social norms and social bonds to others. Crime as presently defined is simply an expression of a particular view of those with power and how people should conduct themselves, and denies people freedom, self-identity and difference.
Postmodernists suggest a new definition of crime. They argue that it is necessary to go beyond narrow legal definitions of crime and develop a wider conception of crime based on justice and respect for people's chosen identities and lifestyles. Henry and Milovanich suggests that crime should be taken beyond the narrow legal definition to a wider conception of social harm, embracing all threats and risks to people, pursuing increasingly diverse lifestyles and identities. They suggest that crime should be reconceptualised, not simply as breaking laws, but as people using power to show disrespect for others by causing them harm of some sort.
They identify two forms of harm. Harms of reduction, power is used to cause victim to experience some immediate loss or injury. Harms of repression, power is used to restrict future human development. This conception of harm includes actions which are either not illegal or not traditionally taken very seriously or perceived as part of the current crime problem. Criticisms.
Criticisms of the postmodernist theory is that it points at the failure of grand theories but doesn't put anything in its place. It does nothing to help society, so though it suggests that it needs to be improved, they don't suggest how. There is no solution. But then that's what they argue, that there is no solution. They fail to accept not everything is hyper-real. Some people do live in reality. Chomsky claims postmodernism is meaningless. It exaggerates the degree of economic and social change. Evidence suggests that social class is still important as a source of identity.
It emphasises how consumers, individuals and choice, underemphasises on how choice is socially created, no empirical evidence to support their theories, ignores power structures in society, science is not simply an ideology, postmodern society is an ideology invention and doesn't actually exist.
That's all, folks.
The end.